Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to walk through creating a JavaFX Java application to play a video. So basically, JavaFX provides audio and video multimedia capabilities. So the classes that we're going to see are in the JavaFX scene.media package. So we're going to see some new classes. One class that's mentioned in the Deitel text is the audio clip class. This basically allows you to play some simple audio playback, but for more audio playback functionality and what we use in this project, you can use the classes MediaPlayer, and MediaView. And we're really going to use all three of them. We'll see how they are related to each other and how we can use them in conjunction to play a video. So this goes along with section or chapter 22.6 of the Deitel book, where we'll be building a video player using these classes. If you are in the Java course, you can find this finished project in the materials folder under examples from the chapter, or in the assignments folder as a zip file. Now, one of the things that we add to our project, and we'll see it in action in a minute, is a video from the NASA library. So we needed to obtain a video, and I'm going to open up this website right here, nasa.gov, and the full URL is actually in the course and also in the textbook in this chapter. It's a nice little place to go if you need a video to play, to sample, to try out this type of project. We're actually using this one right here, the Atlantis launch. I had downloaded the video and added it to the project. This is all part of what you would download from Blackboard if you were downloading it. It's already there, but I just wanted to let you know that you could go out to this point to find, different videos to download. So let's go back to our project in Eclipse. Now, I've already created the project and called it VideoPlayer. And this one, as we always have, we have a few Java source code files, and here they are: VideoPlayer controller. They're located, I put them in the default package within SRC for source. And so nothing new there. But when you download the zip file from our course, you're going to find that there's a few other files in there. One is VideoPlayer.fxml, and recall that that type of file actually defines the layout of what the user sees when this runs. So that's the role of that particular file, and we'll talk more about it. But it is placed inside that SRC directory as well as the actual video. This right here, sts117.mp4, is the actual video we want to play. So I have actually put all of these files into that folder, SRC. So I just wanted to let you know where you could place those. Let me go ahead and run this project, and we'll talk a little bit more about project structure. Okay, so here is the video player application running. Initially, we have, this area here where we're going to be playing a video, but nothing playing yet. So if we click the play button, it does start the audio and video for this. Notice the pause. The play button toggles to pause when the user clicks it as part of the functionality of this application. I'm going to go ahead and X out of that. And I wanted to tell you just a few more things about this project. If you right-click the project and go to Properties, up here at the top, Resource, I don't know if you knew this, but you can access very quickly the location of your project on your computer and even open it. And it will go right to File Explorer, open it to the location of your project, and then you can see the structure. So notice all these files I placed in the SRC folder. This one here, controls FX 84012. I wanted to pause and explain what's going on there. That particular file is what's called a jar file, and you'll see if you have your file extensions turned on, or if you look over here at the type, it's a jar file. It's actually an extension, file extension .jar, and a jar file is a Java archive. It's a file format used to aggregate many Java classes together. Why is this here? Basically, this particular application, if it encounters an error when trying to play the video, pops up an error dialog. It's actually called an exception dialog, class exception dialog. And it's not part of the Java API that's built in and released to us. It's part of an open source project called ControlsFX. Here's actually the website for it where you can download it, although we already have it. But I just wanted to let you know where that was coming from, and that is mentioned in the chapter as well. So that jar file will enable us, it basically brings in the exception dialog class so that we can use it in our project. So we dropped that file in as well. Now, when you initially set up this project, if you try to run it, there may be errors, and there are some things that you want to look at and recall from your JavaFX experience prior. One is the build path. So I'm going to go to configure build path. You know, your system library may look differently than mine. That's not a cause for concern. I'm using JDK version 14 right here. And you should have something similar, maybe not exactly the same, but you also have to link up to whatever the name of your JavaFX library is. I called mine JavaFX 15. This is something that should have been created at an earlier time in the course. If you don't have it, under Start Here How To, there is information about JavaFX and getting started with that, downloading it, installing it, and then finally adding the user class library. So here I have added this as a library, so that has already been added. And also I have added this external jar. So this is grayed out right now, but that is how you go ahead and you can add these, add external jar and the library for JavaFX. So those need to be there for this to work correctly. Also, something covered in the earlier, actually I want run configurations up here, covered in the earlier weeks is this concept of run configurations. If you go to run configurations arguments, we had added these lines of code. Again, this is also outlined in the Start Here How To for JavaFX. We've added this to basically point Eclipse to these modules to enable the JavaFX components to work. So, you know, if for some reason you get an error, which is probably the only thing, you know, that you might run into, is basically it might have to do with a couple of these configurations aren't quite there. So that's something to keep in mind. Now we're in the context of running this from Eclipse, but just in case you were running this from a command line, you'll see in section 22.6 of your text that it does describe how you can reference a jar file using the the dash class path option, followed by the name of the jar to compile, and the -cp option to run. So again, those are just things that you would need to know if you're running it from the command line instead of inside of Eclipse. So let's take a look at this file, VideoPlayer.fxml. Now these aren't created, these file types, from within Eclipse. Recall that we typically define our layout using Scene Builder. Scene Builder is a great little tool that allows us to create graphical user interfaces quickly with a drag and drop type thing. I do happen to have it open here where we can take a look at it. Basically, this particular layout uses a border pane, which is a container type, and we've drag and dropped a media viewer, which allows us to actually show media, as that name would describe there. And also we've added a toolbar down here at the bottom with one button. So recall over here on the left under the hierarchy, you can kind of see the hierarchy. We have a border pane, a media view, a toolbar, and on the toolbar button. We do see some interesting things we haven't seen before. So what's going on there? I'm going to create a new file just for a moment here, just so you can see how this particular type of container works for us, the border pane. So border pane has regions, and that's what these are about. And if I want to drag and drop a media view, as I'm dragging it asks where I want it. So that's what the top, left, right, and bottom is. So I can drag things around. Actually, a toolbar, I believe, is up here. Yes, in the containers. So I can drag that down to the bottom of the screen. Notice it adds a button for me. So I'm going to X out of that, but I just wanted to show you where that left, right, top, why it looked a little unusual there. Just drag and drop as normal and move things around as desired, but it does organize into a border pane where there's a top, bottom, left, right, and a center. So we already have the finished product here. We're taking a look at it. A couple of the things that are probably the most important is under document over here on the left-hand side. It's really important to understand this controller bit. Recall that a controller class needs to be specified here. The controller class is the name of the Java class that you want to use to basically link up to this GUI, this graphical user interface. And when you specify a controller class and you've completed everything you want to complete on the layout, recall that you can go up to View Sample Controller Skeleton, and it generates for you the Java code. Now we already have the completed Java code in our project, but I'm just trying to link together all these pieces so you can see how that was developed initially. Inside of Eclipse it was modified and pieces were added to it, but this is how it's initially developed, as well as the two pieces are linked together, FXML with Java code. So that controller class is really important, as well as specifying for each one of these, the media view. If you come over here on the right hand side under code, it must have an ID, and you want to keep track of what that ID is, media view. Also, the button down here must have an ID. So we gave it this ID of play pause button, and it has an action pressed. On action, basically this is the name of the method that we would like to execute when the button is pressed. You might ask yourself, what method? We're not even into Java code yet. That's true, but what this will do is it will set us up so that we can have a method with this name that's wired up to this button, so that when the user clicks the button, we can go into our Java code in Eclipse and add code to a method called play pause button pressed to do what it is we want to do. So these are things that you want to understand as you're walking through this. If you were to add more to this, like a stop button, these are considerations that you would want to make. So by the way, after all is said and done, the FXML file would look something like this. I'm actually looking at it in Notepad++, just so that you can see the XML that's rendered from doing all that dragging and dropping. On the outside, we have a border pane. Okay. We also, and this is a little different from what we've seen before. Oh, here's where the controller class is specified. We have a element called bottom and one called center. And that's something we haven't seen before, but that's unique to our border pane. This basically says at the bottom of the screen, we're going to put inside of it a toolbar that has various items. Actually, we only have one, and our item is a button. So notice the nesting of hierarchical controls we have here. And we're not worried about the fact that bottom was actually added before center. They're going to render correctly based on their description. So center will be placed actually above our toolbar when this is displayed. Notice the button has the ID and the on action that we've specified, and MediaView also has an ID that is relevant there. So important things. It's good to kind of poke into that Notepad ++ or Notepad or any text editor just to see what this looks like, so that you understand what's being generated by Scene Builder. So let's go back to Eclipse, and that's just kind of a little overview of that file called VideoPlayer.fxml. Let's switch our attention now to the Java source code. When we take a look through these files, actually there's two, VideoPlayer and VideoPlayer Controller. We're going to see three new classes that we haven't used yet. Media, MediaPlayer, and MediaView. Media is basically used to specify the location of the media that we want to play. And by media, I mean video. And it provides access to information about it, like how long it is, the duration, the dimensions, and other information about the media. MediaPlayer, on the other hand, works with the media object. It loads it up and it controls the playback. So there's multiple stages that we can go through with a video. It's ready, video's ready, video's playing, video's paused, that kind of thing. All those stages are managed by MediaPlayer. And finally, the third of those three classes I mentioned is MediaView. This actually displays the media by being played by a given MediaPlayer object. So it's the displayer. So let's take a look at VideoPlayer Controller. Recall this particular class, the skeleton of it can be generated from Scene Builder. It doesn't have all of this in it, but it does get you started with adding a media view and a button. So we'll see that. But I wanted to point out there are a number of import statements up here, some of these being new, such as these. Media, MediaPlayer, MediaView. And this one right here is actually importing the exception dialog class from that controls FX jar that we included in our project. And that dialog, if we do everything right, we'll never see because it's only ever displayed when there's an error with playing the video. So let's take a look at what we have in this class. We've got 4 different variables up here, 2 of which have this @fxml annotation in front of it. That denotes that we're referencing objects from the fxml. So this media view object actually is going to point to this media view here in Scene Builder that we were just working with. Same would go for this button here called Play Pause Button. That's going to reference our button in the GUI, in the graphical user interface. So those are the 2 things that the user is going to view and interact with. But we also need a couple other variables. The media player we know is responsible for managing the stages of playing, paused, etc. So we need that to interact with the media view. And we also need this Boolean variable called playing. Remember, Boolean can only be true or false. We're going to use it to indicate whether the video is currently playing, so that this will aid us in that functionality we saw moments ago when we played the video. And when we play the video, the text on the button changes to pause. Call that the play pause toggle. to do that, we need to know at any point if the video is playing. So we initially set it to false, but when the user clicks play, we will set that to true, and we'll see that a little bit later. So we have this method here, initialize, which is most of the class actually. There's a lot of code in initialize. So there it is. Initialize is going to, once the document's loaded, initialize is called. So this is where we want to add code to initialize, set up our program with the desired functionality. So we'll use it to configure our media player and also to register events. So let's take a look. I had collapsed it there. Nice thing that we can do sometimes when we're trying to look at other methods without the clutter. But let's take a look at initialize here. First of all, we want to get a reference to the actual video. And we do so right here, VideoPlayer controller dot class. This is like calling get class. It creates a class object representing the video player controller class. And from it, we're able to call get resource with the following name. So that gives us a URL of its location, but remember that media represents the location. So once we have that URL, we're able to create a media object for that specified URL. And so media, basically connects us to the location on disk. But media player here, we're creating a media player object because it's going to allow us to interact with the stages of playing, stopping, pausing, etc. So here we create a new media player object associated with that media we just created from the URL, and we assign it to media player. Notice media player we defined up here inside of the class, and the reason why we did that and we didn't define it inside of initialize like we did media was because media player will be referenced within several methods within the same class. So by declaring it at the class level, we're going to be able to utilize it in multiple methods in this class. So here we create we assign media player a reference to this new thing we're creating from media, our new media player object. And then finally, remember, media view is how we actually display the media player. This is our view for the user. So we set media view set media player to, and then we pass it the media player object we just created. So seems kind of wordy, but those three classes, media, media player, and then finally media view, work in conjunction to establish the location, associate functionality for stopping and starting and so forth associated with state, and finally actually represent it in a way that the user can see using the media view. So those three classes basically work together. After that, we have three other statements here. This one, and this one. And really, they're all very similar in format if you take a look at them. They are all what you call handlers, event handlers. And remember, media player transitions through various states, like ready, playing, paused. So what we can do is we can execute a task, basically we call this an event handler, to execute as the media player enters those corresponding states. So for example, when the video ends, a state called on end of media occurs. So we can say media player, when on end of media occurs, I want you to do the following. And the following is what occurs inside of those parentheses. Now this code here, it looks a little unusual, and that's because we're using what is called an anonymous inner class. An anonymous inner class allows us to, on the fly, create a class and basically specify what interface we're implementing. So this allows us to create a class that's unnamed that uses the runnable interface. And the runnable interface has one method called run that is going to be executed automatically. So anonymous inner class, we say new runnable, and everything inside of these brackets here is a definition of that class. We have one method in it called run, which defines what we should do when the media ends. So even though some of the code looks a little unusual, basically in the end, everything we have inside of set on end of media here, inside of the run, is going to be executed when the video completes playing. So when the video completes playing, we want to set that Boolean flag, recall that is used to indicate whether the video is playing, back to false. We want to set the text on the play button back to play. We want to set the marker to the beginning of the video, and we also want to stop playing the video. So those four statements there accomplish that task in the event handler that we've created. So that's the event handler for on end of media. There is also an event called on error. And when an error occurs, we want to pop up an exception dialog that shows the error and waits for the user to respond to the dialog by clicking OK. And we can do that using the exception dialog class that we've imported from the jar that we included in our project. So it has the same format. Set on error is our way of associating the following code with the event on error. And it has a single run method that inside of it creates an exception dialog. And here it passes it an argument of what the actual error is from the media player that will be displayed. And it says to show and wait. So show and wait means it will pop up the dialog box, but basically everything will be paused in the application until the user clicks on OK there to proceed. So that's that second event handler. We have another down here, the last, called set on ready. And this is called when MediaPlayer enters a ready state. So what we would like to do is bind the media view's height and width properties to the scene's width and height. Scene is basically the container, it's what it's inside of. Why are we doing this? Well, basically, if the app's window is resized, we want the media view's width and height to adjust. So that's what this is doing here. It creates a double property width and height that represent the width and height of the media view. So we get a reference to those properties here from the media view's width, the media view's height. Double property actually allows us to interact with those values as a named property. And we say width.bind, in other words, set the width equal to whatever I'm going to tell you. And whatever I'm going to tell you is in here. I'm actually saying media view's scene property. That says basically get me the scene in which this media view is displayed and then access its width. So basically we're saying bind the width of this media view to the width of its scene, whatever it's inside of. And we do the same thing for the height. So all three of these, remember, they're not actually run in the initialize. They are run in that they are set up, but the events don't actually occur when the application is initialized. They will be executed once those individual events occur. So if we're lucky, for example, we won't have any errors and this code will never actually need to run. But this attaches that code to those events so that when they do happen, we have code in place that handles them with some finesse instead of just, not working correctly. So all of that was inside of the initialize method. So this last piece here, play, pause, button, pressed, action event, should sound familiar because that is, in fact, if we go back to our FXML, the action, the method that we said should be executed when the button is clicked. So this receives the action event. We don't actually need to interact with that, but it passes it in. What we're going to do here is two things. We're going to adjust the text on the button to say the correct thing, and then we're also going to invert the value of plain. Plain is our Boolean variable that says whether or not the video is currently playing. Initially, it's false when the application loads, but if the user clicks the play button, what we want that to do is set playing equal to true. So this statement will say set playing equal to not playing, whatever it was before, not that. So it was false initially, so by putting the exclamation point in front, this is actually going to evaluate to true and set playing to true. So you can see that this is going to toggle that value. And then it says if it's playing, set the text on the button to pause and actually play it. Otherwise, it's already paused. So go ahead and now they're clicking, let's go ahead and set the play pause button to play and pause it. So I'm sorry, this is actually going to be executed when the user had just clicked they want to pause. So we'll set the button to say play and we will pause it. So you can see that toggle functionality in place there in the play pause button pressed method. So all of this functionality is from VideoPlayer controller. So any code that interacts or defines functionality behind buttons and other things that are associated with the graphical user interface, all of that goes on the controller class. But we still need a class to kick off this application to actually run it. And that's where VideoPlayer comes into play here. This looks very standard. It's similar to the other examples that you've seen of JavaFX. It basically starts everything and identifies which FXML file to load. So the main method down here is invoked and calls launch to launch the application. This launches the app. This method up here then is called start, is called after the app is initialized and ready to run. So when it's initialized and ready to run, we're going to load up VideoPlayer.fxml, and that defines the root here. We're going to set the scene to use that root, and also there is another object we use called stage that specifies the title video player and what scene we're going to be using. That's what we've just defined up here with our video player.fxml. And then finally, the stage is the object where we can invoke the method show. So this is really template boilerplate type stuff that you're going to see in almost any JavaFX application that kicks off a load of a GUI that you've created ahead of time like we did for VideoPlayer FXML. So nothing new here, but this allows us to get started so that when we hit the play button, it actually loads up and plays. So thank you for watching. Now you can try your hand at enhancing this application to add a stop button and associated functionality described in this week's assignment.